Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Fleets for the Future webinar. We will give folks a couple more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I will give folks one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this Fleets for the Future Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Procurement webinar. My name is Sarah Reed, Program Coordinator at the National Association of Regional Councils. If you should have any technical questions during the webinar, please email me. My email is sarah, S-A-R-A-H, @narc.org. You can see it on the welcome slide right now. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end of the presentations. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the questions box on your control panel on the right-hand side. A recording of this webinar will be available and you can download the slides right now in the control panel under handouts. We also have our best practice documents available for download under handouts on your screen now. Great, let's get started. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Kelly Blinn and Philip Krajcik from Meister Consultants Group, a Cadmus company, our technical leads on this project, as well as Ryan Daly from the Electrification Coalition, one of our excellent electric vehicle experts. Our agenda for today includes a background into the Fleets for the Future project before we focus in on electric vehicle infrastructure procurement and planning, and information on the Fleets for the Future opportunities. Please keep in mind you can download the slides for closer viewing and that they will be available following this webinar as well. Fleets for the Future is a Department of Energy grant project led by the National Association of Regional Councils, with our main goals being to lower upfront costs for all types of alternative fuel vehicles by aggregating demand through cooperative procurement. We also developed resources such as procurement best practices, timelines, and checklists to enable fleet managers to plan and optimize alternative fuel usage across their fleets. Our project team consists of 16 partners, including technical advisors from all ranges of fuel types, 5 regional council team members who have led their own procurement, and a handful of outreach clean cities coordinators from across the country. As I mentioned, one of our goals is to create resources to guide fleets through procurement and incorporating alternative fuel vehicles into their fleets. Today, we'll be discussing several of the best practice documents, which are also available on our website at fleetsforthefuture.org and in the handouts tab on your screen. We also have resources on EVSE planning on our website on the resources tab. And to stay up to date on this project, you can follow us on Twitter at fleets4future, and you can sign up for our email list on our website, or if you email me at sarah@nart.org to be added to our list. So before we turn it over for the presentations, I wanted to quickly poll the audience to learn a little bit more about the group. I'm going to post the first question, which is, how would you best characterize your organization? And I'll give folks a few minutes. Give folks one more second. Looks like we've got 55% of folks who are municipal governments. Thank you. And our next question. What is the size of your fleet? Looks like we have a lot of larger fleets. And one more poll question, then we'll go ahead and get started. Great, thank you all for participating in those poll questions. That really helps us tailor our webinar. So our first presenter today will be Ryan Daly from the Electrification Coalition. Ryan, I am switching you right now.
Great, are you able to hear me?
Yes. Did you get my invitation?
Did not. Okay, there it is.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you, Sarah. Thank you everybody for taking the time today. I'm going to go ahead and go into presentation mode here. Looks like you guys can see everything all right.
Looks great.
Sarah, we're all set?
Yep.
Okay, great. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Ryan Daly. I'm here today representing the Electrification Coalition, and we are the EV technical monitors and subject matter experts as part of the Fleets for the Future team. The Electrification Coalition is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization really solely dedicated to accelerating the mass adoption of electric vehicles. Fleets for the Future is one of the projects that we support, but we're also involved in a number of other EV deployment projects around the country, including the Smart Columbus initiative in Ohio, as well as EV accelerator communities in Northern Colorado, Rochester, New York, and Orlando. We do a lot in the way of advocacy and policy work at the national level, but then also have a specific focus for being kind of boots on the ground, working hand in hand with organizations to understand how best to deploy electric vehicles both into fleets, but into their communities as well. And so what we want to talk about today is kind of how we approach the planning process for the rollout of charging infrastructure. And what we think, and this should not come as much of a surprise, but that a broad network of electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE, is really going to be critical to enabling mass adoption of EVs, and that fleets are a large part of that and can lead the way, not only with infrastructure that helps support their vehicles, but also potentially public-facing infrastructure that can be used when fleet vehicles aren't using it. So thinking about ways to think about how to prepare for this, the idea of bundling vehicles with infrastructure can help reduce overall project costs, making sure there's proper understanding of the color of money within your organization and whether fleet costs versus facility funds need to be commingled to get a project together can help you wrap your heads around how best to get a project financed. Site planning and installation, which we'll talk about in greater detail at the end, should be a major focus of a project up front, even before vehicles start coming onto the road, and being based on vehicle use patterns so that you don't overbuild, and then using fleet utilization data to inform operational improvements both before and after you get vehicles on the road. So a couple of different ways to think about vehicles when they charge and where they charge. In addition to fleets would be workplace charging as well. So not only allowing access to your chargers for fleet vehicles, but also to employees, whether it's level 1 or level 2, and I'll get into the details of those. We have seen some scenarios where fleets do have take-home vehicles that are charged at an employee's home. And this can be done, but does come with kind of some added complications or kind of logistical questions about reimbursing electricity costs. And then also drivers who are put into fleet vehicles not only need to worry about charging at fleet facilities, but they may also need to consider where they would charge when they're out driving around your particular location. And so those opportunity charges and how they would access publicly accessible charging. So real quick, let's get into the details of our different charging levels. So level 1 is really just the most basic, ubiquitous charging that's out there. And this is literally just plugging a vehicle into a wall socket, into a 120 volt plug that we plug all of our other things into. There's no additional equipment that's required for a basic vehicle charge. Each vehicle is going to come with this standard level 1 charger as part of the vehicle. And this is, as a result, because it's the lowest voltage, it is also the slowest charger. And so you're really only going to add 2 to 5 miles of range per hour of charging. This is totally adequate for vehicles that can charge overnight at a particular facility. One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later on is understanding how long vehicles park overnight. And if you've got vehicles that park 15 to 20 hours per night, level 1 is probably going to be sufficient to get those vehicles charged up for the next day. Moving upwards from there is level 2, and this is kind of the most common upgrade for fleets. The cost of installing a level 2 charger can vary heavily depending on a variety of factors that are unique to each facility. We'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of the presentation as well. This is charging using 240 volt residential, 208 volt commercial outlets. This is kind of the easiest way to conceptualize this is the same plug that your dryer uses at home. And this charge is going to add between 10 to 20 miles an hour, 10 to 20 miles of range per hour of charging, depending on the vehicle. And this means that you can get a full charge in, anywhere from kind of 4 to 8 hours, just depending on the state of the battery when it comes in. And then we move on up to DC fast chargers. In most instances, most fleets, at least that we've worked with, do not necessarily need much in the way of DC fast chargers. One, due to the high cost of installation, but also that fleets should be able to take advantage of a growing network of publicly available DC fast chargers. And so this charger, you can see the 3 different plug types that go with the different vehicles based on which plug standard they use. And this really enables rapid charging so that we can get 50 to 70 miles per range in 20 minutes of charging, and that a vehicle really doesn't have to spend a whole lot of time and they can get back on the road. So kind of the initial steps to enabling an experience that looks more like when we pull into a gas station, so people can fuel up quickly and get back on the road. So while the public charging network continues to grow, fleets do need to think about whether or not they're going to install their own infrastructure. And so understanding, one, your EVSE options based on the vehicles that you select is going to be critical. So all vehicles are going to be able to charge out of the box on level 1 and level 2, but not all vehicles are going to come with the DC fast charge capability. And this should inform not only your infrastructure, but your EV rollout from the very beginning. Level 2 is a good option for a lot of fleet applications, but it can get expensive in some cases, and how you think about your facilities and whether or not you need upgrades through trenching or boring, laying conduit, adding electrical capacity, things like that can really impact the cost of installing EVSE. And so having site visits done early is a good idea. And so what I want to talk about within that is understanding how routes, times, and parking locations would inform your EVSE rollout. So how we think of this, and when we do one of our more detailed analyses with a particular fleet, we'll use telematics data to understand how the location and time data helps us understand a vehicle's charging needs. And the most basic way to do that is start to look at the trips that a vehicle travels over the course of each individual day, and then what patterns start to emerge as a result of that. So that with telematics data, we can see how, where, when, and how long a charge is going to be needed to keep these vehicles on the road. So an example we have up here in this chart, each of these bars represents an individual trip, where the width of the bar represents the duration of the trip, and then the colors on either side represent where that vehicle was parked at the beginning of the trip on the left, and then at the end of the trip on the right. So with this particular vehicle, we see that starts most of its days a little after 6 in the morning at lot 2, pretty typically goes to lot 1 shortly thereafter, does a little bit of driving around in the middle of the day, but has a pretty consistent 2-hour window every day between about 12:45 and 3 when it could charge up at lot 1 if it needed to. And then just about every night it returns back to lot 2, where on average it parks for more than 14 hours each night. And then what we do from here is start to take kind of a facility and holistic look at how vehicles relate to one another. So in taking the same visualization to the next step, we can look at how the vehicle we just looked at is above, how that relates to another vehicle operating within the fleet that on average leaves lot 1 every morning by 7:30 a.m. And so it leaves this window between 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. each day where it's vacating its parking spot at this particular facility, and the vehicle above could use that parking spot during the day to charge up. And so the reason that we look at things like this is because the kind of most common scenario that we run up against is that a fleet might want to install one level 2 charger to support every vehicle that comes into the fleet. And our response to that is typically that the answer is you probably need somewhere less than one level 2 charger to support your vehicles. And so in this particular scenario, we probably say at most you need one level 2 charger to support these 2 vehicles. But in reality, given their drive cycles and how much they actually need to drive during the day, plus 14 to 16 hour overnight parking for either vehicle, it could probably also get away with level 1 most of the time. And so we use this information to help fleets optimize that ratio of vehicles to infrastructure and keep overall project costs down. Now, another thing to think about both before and after EVs are deployed into your fleet is charging management. And why is this important? You really want to understand if there's going to be a significant impact of when your vehicles would plug into your facilities, and how that's going to be impacted by demand charges and time of use rates. And this is really critical because if you don't understand these things, you start plugging vehicles in at the wrong time of the day, it can also really hamper the economics of an EV deployment. And so the example that we have in here from on the lower left is a fleet in California that got a bunch of vehicles. They didn't really think about managing their charging before the vehicles came in. And once they did, they saw that their utility bills went up by $100 per day in the summer. And that was because all these vehicles were out driving during the middle of the day. They'd come in around 4 o'clock, the hottest part of the day, when the AC units are running high for the building, and everybody was plugging in at that kind of peak demand time for electricity. And that really had a major impact on their utility bills when those vehicles didn't need to be used again until 7 or 8 the next morning. And really, they didn't need to start their charges until 7 or 8 at night. And so understanding the impact of when you would expect these vehicles to plug in and how that's impacted by your utility rates is pretty critical to understand both upfront and then when the vehicles roll into the fleet. And so with that, I will stop.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And I will switch to Kelly. We have next from Cadmus.
Okay, great. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. And can you see my screen?
Not yet. Did you accept?
Oh, yeah.
Did it not pop up for you, Kelly?
It did, but it's not letting me click it for some reason.
Okay, here. I'll try again. Did you get another notification, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm trying to click the play button, but it's not responding. I'm not sure if you have the slides, if you want to just click through them. I'm not why it's not working.
Okay, yep, I can go ahead and do that. So just next slide.
Okay, so are you on the first slide?
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Hi, everyone. My name's Kelly Blinn, and I work with Meister Consultants Group, which is now part of Cadmus, and I specialize in transportation and strategic electrification. Cadmus is a sustainability consulting company focused on creating social good, and we work on a variety of projects across a range of clean and renewable technologies, on projects from policy and planning to implementation and market development. And today we're going to share a brief overview of considerations for electric vehicle charging infrastructure for medium and heavy duty vehicles like trucks and buses, starting with why these vehicles are important to consider now, some background on heavy duty vehicle charging technologies, considerations and challenges, and strategies. So Sarah, I'm on slide 4. So why should we care about medium and heavy duty vehicles? First, because these vehicles have very low fuel economy and tend to be driven much further than light duty vehicles. Their greenhouse gas and air pollution impact per vehicle is much higher. And in addition, because these vehicles often operate near where people live and work, they generate more exposure to air pollutants. Finally, because these vehicles tend to be used more and they're likely to generate more operating savings more quickly, they may have a shorter payback period than electric light duty vehicles. Moving on to slide 5. Additionally, electric models of different trucks and buses are beginning to become commercially available, and upfront costs are falling as battery costs decline. As VW settlement mitigation funds are distributed, many states are planning to utilize these funds for electric transit buses, school buses, and other heavy-duty vehicles. So far, transit buses are the furthest along on the path towards commercialization, with delivery trucks, yard trucks, and school buses close behind, and in many demonstration projects around the country. So we can move on to slide 6. And next, we'll discuss a brief overview of electric truck and bus charging approaches and technologies. So on slide 7, these are a couple of considerations of how charging for medium and heavy duty vehicles is different than light duty vehicles. First, the vehicles tend to have much larger batteries, and so their chargers also tend to have be at a higher capacity draw from the grid. This means electric trucks and buses can have a much greater impact on the electric grid by increasing peak loads, as you can see by the relative impact of simultaneously plugging in 100 medium-duty electric trucks or 50 electric buses compared with, say, the Transamerica Pyramid Building in San Francisco. On the other hand, these vehicles could also provide benefit to the electric grid by avoiding peak times or providing grid services. Another consideration is that fleets with electric trucks and buses may need to get on commercial and industrial electricity rates for larger customers, which often means lower per kilowatt hour rates, but also substantial demand charges, as Ryan mentioned, and which we'll talk about a bit more shortly. In general, this means that upfront planning and ongoing charging management will be essential to reduce fuel costs and grid impacts for electric truck and bus charging. So on the next slide, on slide 8, I'm going to talk a little bit about different charging approaches for heavy-duty electric vehicles. And in general, so far, charging approaches have tended to fall into either overnight charging, sometimes called depot or slow charging, where electric trucks and buses charge when not in operation, more slowly and with a lower capacity charger. And the second option would be en route or opportunity charging, where a vehicle charges during breaks in operation at a layover somewhere along its route, typically faster and with a higher capacity charger. And while en-route charging may be preferable in some cases where a vehicle is in operation most of the day and can't meet range requirements on a single charge, in general, overnight or depot charging seems to be preferable where possible to take advantage of lower off-peak electricity costs, simpler and less expensive charger cost and installation, and simpler, more flexible operations and charging scheduling. So on the next slide, slide 10, some examples of different charging technologies that have been deployed thus far for overnight and en route charging are summarized here. On the left, you have an example of an in-depot or overnight charger located at a fleet's parking facility, which is lower capacity, such as 20 to 120 kilowatts. To the right, you have an overhead en route charger for an electric bus, this one developed by Proterra. These chargers are high capacity, approximately 450 kilowatt conductive chargers that fleets have typically located at a terminal station where buses can recharge for about 5 or 10 minutes between trips. To the right of that, you have an example of an in-ground wireless inductive charger used for electric bus en route charging. These chargers can be varying capacities and have been used by bus fleets to top up at the end of longer routes. Of course, these technologies could also be deployed in different configurations, such as at a fleet's depot instead. These are simply examples of how they've tended to be used so far. Finally, on the right, we have an example that's familiar to those of you who have visited cities with old electric trolley buses, an overhead catenary wire where a vehicle has a very small onboard battery and charges continuously through the catenary. We won't talk too much about this technology as it's generally pretty expensive to install and maintain, though there are some demonstration projects for certain high volume freight routes. Moving on to slide 11. So far, electric truck and bus manufacturers have often provided custom charging infrastructure with their vehicles, but have also made their vehicles compatible with other companies' chargers. And just recently, this year, a common charger standard has been released for medium and heavy-duty vehicles that can be used for plug-in, slow, or fast charging. And 2 other standards for overhead high-capacity charging and wireless high-capacity charging are in development, all of which should help standardize the technologies available for these vehicles. So next we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges and considerations for charging medium and heavy duty vehicles. Some of which will be similar to what Ryan spoke about, simply at a larger scale. So on slide 13, one key consideration for electric truck and bus charging is infrastructure costs. The table on the right shows general ranges for different capacity chargers and their installation costs, which can be substantial, particularly if a lot of trenching and running conduit is required. These costs also don't take into consideration the cost of upgrading electric distribution capacity, serving the chargers if that's needed. In some cases, those costs have been substantial, such as a fleet in California with many electric trucks that had to pay to upgrade a transformer. However, as we'll talk about later, in some cases, utilities may be able to cover these costs. On the next slide, a second consideration is infrastructure siting. While generally simpler at a fleet's depot, if the electricity source is far from where vehicles park, costs can increase. And if fleets move to electrify most or all of their vehicles, they may begin to run into space constraints for where to locate chargers. Siting en route chargers is generally more complicated, given that fleets often don't own real estate outside their depots. And if charges need to be sited in the public right-of-way, such as this overhead electric bus charger in Louisville, Kentucky that you see in the lower photo. On the next slide, third consideration is electric utility rate designs. As a fleet invests in electric trucks and buses, it may need to switch to a new electricity rate, depending on the potential additional peak load. The additional peak load will depend on the number of chargers, their power draw, and how and when the fleet plans to charge their vehicles. So far, there are very few utilities that have designed rates for these types of vehicles, since there's so few on the road so far. And so instead, the rates that tend to apply have been designed for a very different type of customer, typically that have much more consistent and on-peak loads, such as a typical office building illustrated on the right. An overnight charged electric truck or bus would have almost an opposite shape, since it would be in operation during the day and charging at night. And yet many available electric rates would not compensate for that off-peak charging. On the next slide, going back to demand charges, which Ryan spoke about a little bit, the rates for electric truck and bus charging may have pretty high demand charges, so it's something to look at as you're considering investing in these vehicles. And so say your peak draw was 100 kilowatts from plugging in your 2 electric trucks with 50 kilowatt chargers. If your electric rate had a demand charge of $10 per kilowatt, you'd pay $1,000 a month in demand charges on your utility bill. When charging with high capacity chargers, demand charges can quickly make up a majority of a fleet's electric bill, as you can see with the charts at the right from the Federal Transit Administration, particularly when demand charges reach $20 per kilowatt. And the FTA did look at kind of a range of demand charges from utilities around the country and found that in some cases you might be lucky and have electric rates available that have $0 or no demand charges, all the way up to $20 or $25. So it really is useful to look at what's available and what electric rates will apply early. On the next slide, an additional consideration is simply the impact that medium and heavy duty charging will have on your operations, including managing the state of charge for your vehicles, managing your typical maintenance activities around that charging schedule, and managing if multiple vehicles are using the same charger, being able to coordinate that. Additionally, there can be weather impacts to outdoor charger performance, as well as vehicle range, and so operations may need to shift seasonally, just something else to think about. Finally, we'll move on to a couple of strategies to consider for how to address some of these challenges and considerations. Here on slide 19, today I'm going to focus primarily on the strategies that are under fleet's control on the left here. Though wanted to make you aware of some of the options that can have a major impact on bringing down costs for fueling electric trucks and buses that require outside stakeholder action. These include specialized commercial EV rates, which do exist in some utility service areas, earning revenue through participating in demand response or vehicle to grid programs, and make-ready incentives, which mean that some utilities are able to cover the costs of charging infrastructure installation. So we won't focus too much more on those today, though we do have more information. I'd be happy to follow up if anyone's interested. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the strategies that are under fleet's control, starting with upfront charging planning here on slide 20. This really echoes what Ryan was discussing. It's probably the most important strategy is simply doing this upfront assessment, assessing your charging needs and schedules, particularly at different levels of fleet electrification, how that relates to your depot's current electric capacity and whether you'll need upgrades, and the potential to employ strategies to minimize peak electricity demands, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the following slides. And by planning up front, for example, one transit agency in California was able to avoid paying for a very costly substation upgrade by adopting plans to manage its peak load with a software solution. It's important to consider your long-term electrification plans if possible, as it may be more cost-effective to upgrade and install infrastructure all at once rather than in phases. Next, I'll talk a little bit about charging management software that can help schedule charging, minimize peak loads, and take advantage of lower off-peak rates in some cases. As I mentioned on the previous slide, Antelope Valley Transit Agency in California worked to integrate a software solution to manage its peak loads and shift charging to lower cost periods. An additional strategy to consider, fleets and states with deregulated electricity markets may be able to work with an independent supplier to secure better electricity rates tailored to its fleet's load profile, particularly for overnight charging. And just as one example, Philadelphia's transit agency, SEPTA, currently procures electricity from an independent supplier for its rail system. And as it brings 25 electric buses into its fleet that will charge overnight, the agency expects that it can negotiate a lower rate for those buses. Finally, one more strategy to consider is integration with energy storage systems. These systems may be a solution to shield fleets from high demand charges by smoothing peak loads. And one example you could look to, Martha's Vineyard, their transit agency in Massachusetts, has received a state grant for an energy storage system that it will be demonstrating for being able to power 6 to 8 buses that will help them mitigate demand charges. And they're also going to be installing a solar canopy over their fleet's parking to help charge that storage system, if you're interested in looking more into what that fleet has done. So this has been a really quick summary of the actions available to fleets to manage electric truck and bus charging. And while we don't have the time to discuss the strategies that require outside stakeholder action, the bottom line is that it's essential to collaborate early with your utility and other key stakeholders to explore the potential to reduce upfront charging infrastructure costs as well as ongoing electricity costs. So I hope this has been a helpful overview and introduction of the available technologies, approaches, and challenges for medium and heavy duty electric vehicle charging. And please feel free to follow up with questions that can't be addressed on the webinar. My email address is here in the PowerPoint if you'd like to reach out. So thanks, and I will hand it over to Philip next.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Philip, we can see your screen.
Great, and my screen's coming through. Okay, so thanks Kelly and Ryan for those great presentations. I hope everyone found them instructive and informative in terms of planning and implementation considerations around EV charging deployments. My name is Philip Krajcik and I lead the technical team on the Fleets for the Future project. And as Sarah mentioned before, this project is really designed to help fleets address the upfront cost barriers of procuring alternative fuel vehicles and associated equipment. And as such, I'm going to switch to a very practical matter of simply how one might obtain some of the EV charging solutions that we've been talking about at least cost by leveraging the solutions that have been created through this project. So I'm going to go through 3 different procurements that are happening through Fleets for the Future and tell you a little bit about whether or not you may be eligible for them and how to learn more. So the first thing I wanted to show you is that we have our project partners at the National Joint Powers Alliance and the Metropolitan Area Planning Council have both created nationally available contracts that you may be able to use to purchase a whole range of solutions. And the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments is creating a regional solicitation that will be valuable for any of you in the Mid-Atlantic area. So generally, the procurement contracts that are that have been created through this program are available to many of the entities that are on this webinar today. I noticed that most of you are representing municipalities or state agencies or nonprofits, and as such, you're all eligible to purchase off of these contracts. I would note that you'll want to determine within your own state and local procurement bylaws whether the procurements that we've conducted meet the requirements that you have in place. But in terms of eligibility to become a member of our procurements and use our contracts, these are the typical entities, and you'll want to look at NJPA's website to confirm, or to the Massachusetts Combis website to confirm if you're not quite sure where you stand within the eligible procurement eligible purchasers. So we created these contracts with the intention of having a really broad availability of a wide range of solutions, spanning the hardware, installation, and network services. On hardware, we wanted network-capable and non-network electric vehicle charging stations that went from level 1 to level 2 to DC fast charge, as well as maintenance and repair services, parts, supplies, leasing, and warranties. Then we also made sure that the contracts include installation services, including site assessment and preparation, and the actual installation. And then finally, the network services to ensure that people are billed correctly and reporting is done well, and the project can be managed and monitored. So next slide, I'm going to jump into the awarded vendors on the NJPA contract. They received 14 responses to the solicitation that we developed with them, and awarded 5 contracts to the vendors that they thought brought the best value to their membership. These included AeroVironment, ChargePoint, Greenlots, LilyPad, and Siemens. And each of these on the slide deck, which you will receive, has a link to that specific contract so you can learn more. As I mentioned, these are full catalog awards that allow you to get the whole range of solutions that these companies offer, as opposed to mini procurements, which just allow you to get a highly specified specific type of equipment. So this is a really great opportunity for you to use a contract that's been developed that has significant bulk discounts, but also has the opportunity for you to get a customized specific solution that meets your needs. So to give you a little more understanding of the indicative levels of discounts, I thought I'd give you this chart of pricing for those 5 vendors. And typically, we've been finding that they've been willing to discount level 2 charging hardware in a range of about 15 to 30%. And for DC fast charge, it's typically been about 5 to 15%. And you'll need to confirm those prices when you contact the vendors once you go through the process, as these were developed last year, and so they may evolve. But generally speaking, it speaks to the value of cooperative procurement and enabling you to get a significant discount off of MSRP. Switching to the contract available through the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the state of Massachusetts, they have a award through their VEH 102 contract, and there's 6 vendors on this contract, which include Clipper Creek, Verdeck, EVSE, LLC, Graybar, Voltrek, and Wattzilla. And just like the NJPA contracts, they're full catalog awards that have a wide range of services available. On the subject of pricing for the MAPC's contracts, we're finding very similar results, where their vendors have discounted level 2 charging anywhere from 5 to 35%, and DC fast charge a slightly lower degree. And you can review this slide on your leisure after the presentation if you'd like to learn more about specific vendors you might want to contact. One thing to note on the MAPC Combis VH102 procurement is that fees are relative to a 2016 MSRP, and just like with NJPA, the pricing is going to vary based on the scope of work that you submit to the vendors. But the way that you would use this contract is you would submit a statement of work. You can send it to any or all of the vendors on the contract, and it's highly recommended that you would contact several of them as opposed to just approaching one of them. And in fact, Massachusetts entities that use this contract are required to at least request 3 or more quotes where it's practicable. With that, I've just included these contact information for your reference. Scott Carr is the lead on the NJPA contract, and Megan Aki and Allison Felix at the Boston Regional Council, MAPC, are also available to answer more questions about specifics of their contracts. So with that, I will turn it back to Sarah for our Q&A session.
Great. Thank you, Philip. All right, so thank you, and Ryan, Kelly as well. So we have some time for questions, and as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by typing it into the questions box on the control panel on the right-hand side, and we do have a couple of questions. So the first one, are there options for load management technology like PowerFlex or cyber switching on the joint procurement?
Sarah, are we all unmuted now?
Yes, you should be. I can hear you.
Okay, great. So we have Allison Felix from MAPC joining us on the line as well. I have not reviewed the availability of smart charging through those 6 vendors in particular, but she may be able to speak a little bit more directly to whether there's load management opportunities. I would assume that there are some, but not sure which of the vendors offers what sort of solutions. Allison, do you have any additional information?
Allison, we've unmuted you, but okay, well, the person who asked that question, we can reach back out to you too with more information.
Yep, I'm happy to go through the 5 for NJPA and the 6 MAPC vendors and try to find out which of them do and what their services are.
Great. So our next question is, I think came up in Kelly's presentation. It's how hot and how cold? What temps cause trouble?
That's a good question. I know there's been some more research done on the cold end of things, and that some of the early electric bus models had some challenges with their en route chargers in Massachusetts, for example. They were able to find a solution to that, like auxiliary heaters to avoid ice and snow buildup on the chargers. And there's a good report from CalSTART that talks about cold weather performance of electric trucks and buses that I think is a link in my presentation if you'd like to check that out. On the hot side of things, I'd have to get back to you more on at what point it starts to be a challenge. I think on the cold side, it tends to be at freezing and below, typically.
Thanks, Kelly. Are there other regional or state-specific cooperative procurement contracts? West Coast, question mark?
So I'm not aware of any multi-state EV charging contracts on the West Coast, but obviously many states have cooperative procurements through their state procurements, and those are definitely also opportunities that are available to fleets. We found that some fleets prefer to use some of the national cooperative entities because they do tend to have more of the full catalog approach, and as such, they give a little bit more flexibility to the participating fleets, whereas sometimes there's only a couple options on a state contract. So that would be something that you would need to look in your specific state to determine what the solutions they have available are and how that maps out against your needs.
Thank you, Philip. To avoid demand pricing and for level 1 charging, could we use something as simple as a 110-volt timer, something like you'd use for a lamp or Christmas lights?
Hey, this is Ryan. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. I haven't specifically heard of anybody trying that, but it would seem to make sense.
Yeah, and this is Philip. I know I had used those sorts of timers in projects for energy efficiency elsewhere, and I believe that some folks were concerned about using them on higher power draws because some of them are only rated to 15 amps and some of them are rated to 20 or more, and so you just want to make sure that you weren't going to melt the timer or anything like that. But in theory, as Ryan says, I would think it would work.
Thank you both. Just a reminder to input any questions you have. I'll give it a couple more minutes. And right now, this slide has the contact information for NJPA and MAPC if you're interested in reaching out to them, as well as Philip's information. And just a reminder, we will send out a link to the recording in the follow-up email. And right now you can download the slides under handouts in the control panel. We have Kelly's slides and then a combination of Ryan, Philip, and I's slides, as well as 3 of our best practice documents right there. And we do have another question. Commercially available medium-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles. Fleet managers are expressing concern that these vehicles may be bleeding-edge technology. First-time multi-manufacturer partnerships in other alternative fuel vehicles have had high post-purchase costs and pointing of fingers between manufacturers. What are your thoughts?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I did try to kind of put vehicles on a scale there. You know, with transit buses, you do have many manufacturers making them at this point, including kind of long established manufacturers in the bus industry, and several hundred buses deployed over multiple years. So that's a technology where you're beginning to see real empirical data that you can start to rely on and as to how those vehicles are performing. I think at the next level down, you are still seeing kind of more demonstration projects, and so it depends on kind of your willingness for taking on something that's a little bit, you know, still being developed. Though, you know, when you look at vehicles like school buses, for example, you are starting to see again the major manufacturers like Bluebird and Thomas that have typically manufactured diesel school buses getting into the electric school bus game, and I think that will, you know, help to not just have some of the initial manufacturers that have developed prototypes, but have some of the really established manufacturers offering them as well. But certainly, some of these technologies are very much still in demonstration phase, I would say.
Yeah, and I would simply add to that it's I think it is a very legitimate and real concern, and the thing that can help alleviate that, I guess what I would characterize supply side problems where, it's largely niche manufacturers that need volume purchases and growth in their industries in order to establish the kind of economies of scale that are going to allow them to grow and improve and then ensure, parts reliability, service options, things like that. And it's, in some respects, kind of a chicken and an egg problem. And one of the things that we hope through Fleets for the Future and other programs is that as more entities kind of make their intentions and their demand for these vehicles known, then that will help spur the industry and alleviate some of those problems.
Thank you. We have another question. Are there any plans to coordinate purchase time windows through NJPA for EVSE, especially with VW funds becoming available over the next 9 to 12 months?
Yes, we would love to work with any and all willing entities to do that. That has, I'd say, been one of our primary challenges, is trying to get multiple organizations that are operating on different fiscal years with different interests aligned on timing. So for anybody who would have interest in that, please do reach out to the team after this and let us know. The more the merrier.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Allison fixed her her muting issue, but her organization in Boston is also working on a time-specific campaign around EV charging to aggregate a number of the regional participants in that effort, as well as the folks in Washington, the Washington D.C. area. But as Ryan said, we're definitely interested in hearing from those of you on the line today to try to find out if there are additional opportunities to reach out to some of those vendors that are on NJPA or on the ComBuy system and approach them with a specific volume of demand of need and see if we can get discounts that are even greater than what's available based on those ceiling prices that I quoted earlier.
Thank you all. All right, any last minute questions? We have 3 more minutes. Okay, seeing none, thank you again, Ryan, Philip, and Kelly. Do you guys have any other final words?
Nothing other than thanks everyone for joining. Hope this was useful for you in your planning efforts, and hope that you are now able to use some of the contract vehicles we have in place, and we are always happy to answer additional questions as they come up. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Great, and thank you all again for your attendance. And like Philip said, don't hesitate to reach out and check out our website at fleetsforthefuture.org to learn more, all our best practice documents, the resource page on EVSE, and have a great rest of your day.